Hi, my name is Rachel and this is Auxhart Gardening. Today I'm going over 5 mistakes that you might make while seed starting and how to avoid them. So all of these are mistakes that I have personally made while seed starting, and I'm here to tell you about them so that hopefully you don't make those same mistakes. And because it is seed starting season, you'll see a lot of these videos going around talking about how to start seeds, mistakes you can make while seed starting. And while a couple of the things I'm going to cover you might find in those videos, I'm making this video because I realized that some of the mistakes that I made weren't mentioned in those videos. And so I wanted to double down and make sure that somebody tells you, because it can be so easy to think that if you can't start seeds, then maybe you're a bad gardener. And that's not true. You just don't know. And I'm here to tell you. One of the first mistakes you might make that I made is starting your plant on a windowsill. So this is actually 2 mistakes in one. The first mistake is that it's probably going to be too cold for your seeds to germinate. In seed starting, we're normally starting seeds in the winter or in the colder months because we can't start them outside yet. It's too cold. And right near a window is going to be a little colder than pretty much anywhere else in your house. So you may get very slow germination, or it might be too cold to germinate at all. And I saw this my first year when I put a little tray of herbs that I'd started out on the windowsill. So that's mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 is if it does germinate, you might find that there's not enough light coming through your window for your plants to grow big and strong. You might find that they will stretch themselves and become what we call leggy as they're reaching towards that sun because they're not getting enough light. In particular, most people don't know if you're going to keep a plant in a window, you probably want to keep it in a south-facing window because that will get the most sun. But either way, a window is probably not enough light for your seedling. You'll want to get a grow light or something like that if you're going to be starting seeds indoors. Speaking of grow lights, MI Gardener actually has a great video on how to choose a grow light, what sort of characteristics it needs to be good for your plants. And instead of repeating all of that, I'm just going to link his video down below. Another mistake that I've made in the past that I don't think you should make is using real seed starting mix as opposed to compost or potting soil, especially if you're starting indoors. Compost can be acceptable if you're starting outside, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So the first reason that you'll want to use real seed starting mix as opposed to just regular old potting mix is the texture of it. I'm going to take you in to show you the difference. So here I have a handful of regular old potting mix and it looks really nice, but you can kind of see that it's a little chunky. And so if I show you some of the seed starting mix, immediately it is softer, fluffier, there's no big chunks in it. And that is ideal for seed starting. I've had it happen before where one of those bigger chunks from the potting mix sat right on top of where my seed was trying to germinate and just kind of smothered it. So this light, fluffy texture is one of the first reasons that seed starting mix is important. So the third reason you might want to use seed starting mix over something like a sifted compost is because seed starting mix is sterile. Your compost, while it might be good to start seeds in if you're starting them outdoors, is not going to be sterile. And so if you bring all of that inside, you're going to be bringing in that life of the compost into your house. And that's usually not an ideal situation. So if you're starting seeds indoors, you want a sterile potting mix or seed starting mix. And like I've been saying, preferably a seed starting mix. But like I said, if you're starting outdoors, a sifted fine compost would be fine. I know Charles Dowding starts all of his seedlings in compost, and you'll notice he has an outdoor greenhouse to do that in. So if that's your situation and you can start your seeds outdoors, then you don't necessarily need the sterility of the seed starting mix. All right, we're back inside to talk about the 4th mistake you might be making, which is starting your seeds too early. And I know that the temptation is high. I know that you are so excited and you want to get your seeds started as soon as possible. And why not? Why not give them all the time in the world to get to be big and strong before you plant them in your garden so that you can have a longer season, right? The problem with that is space. So I'm working with this shelving unit behind me. It is 4 tiers. This is bigger than any setup I've ever had, but it's still a really small seed starting setup. And something you have to consider when you're starting seeds is how much space do you really have to devote to those seedlings, because they're going to grow, they're going to get big. And I am working with little 6-cell planters for most of my seed starting. And a little tray like that isn't going to hold my seedlings for very long. They're going to get too big for that pretty quickly. And so you have to think about, do I have the room to pot up these plants? Secondly, do I have the time to pot up all these plants? My trays I can hold 50 seedlings in a tray, and I have 2 trays plus all this little stuff on the top shelf. And so that's 100 plus plants to transplant into a bigger container. And then where am I going to put all those containers, right? Last year, what I did was I potted up from these little baby trays into solo cup size pots. And that was able to fit out in my greenhouse. It was about warm enough by then for me to stick them out in my tiny greenhouse. But if I had had to keep all of those inside, then I would not have had the room. And so if you're thinking about starting seeds indoors, you really need to think about, do I have the space for these? And do I have the space to up pot them if I start them sooner? The standard wisdom is to start your seeds about 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost date. And last frost date is just the estimated day that your zone, your area, will be past the danger of frost. And so you start about 6 to 8 weeks before that, and that generally is the estimate for not needing to pot up, going straight from starting directly into your soil. However, if you do want to get a head start, say 12 weeks before your last frost date, then you will need to plan to have the space to pot up and continue keeping those seeds, those plants, either in a greenhouse or indoors under grow lights. The last thing I want to talk to you about is the mistake of heat, either too little or too much. So we talked about in the first mistake that you might put it next to a windowsill and it might be too cold. And the fix for this is to use something like a heat mat, right? And so a lot of people will start their seeds on heat mats indoors. Something else you can do, which I also do, is when I'm starting larger amounts of plants, I will lock them in a closet with a space heater, and that usually is enough to keep them warm enough to germinate. But the second part of this mistake is keeping them on the heat after they have germinated. And so let me show you. So right here I have some seedlings that have recently germinated, some of them more recent than others. But if I take you into this one, you can see that the tips of this kind of look a little crispy and yellow, and it's not like a super healthy looking seedling. And that is because I didn't think, and I just left this whole thing on the heat mat well after these had come up. And the heat and the light and everything was too much for them. And so your plants don't want to be at 80 degrees right after they've sprouted, even though that germination will go faster at that heat. Once they've germinated, once they've come up, they don't need that anymore. And you may end up crispifying your seedlings if you try to keep them too hot after they've germinated. Additionally, because of heat mats, you might find that your cells dry out more quickly than you might estimate, like in your head. We have a good sense of, it takes this long for something to dry out, but because you're heating it from below and probably also heating from above with a grow light, this is probably going to dry out a lot faster than you think. And when your seedlings dry out, they shrivel and die, and it's very sad. So just keep an extra watch on your seedlings, make sure they don't dry out. All right, so let's review. Mistake number 1, too cold, putting it in a windowsill. and not giving it enough light in said windowsill. Mistake number 3, using regular old potting mix instead of a sterile seed starting mix or a sifted compost outdoors. Mistake 4 is not thinking about having enough room when you're starting all of your seedlings, not thinking about whether or not you'll need to pot up, etc. And mistake number 5 is too much heat, so either not taking them off that heat after they've germinated or not watching close enough and having them dry out before they've germinated or even after they've germinated. So I hope I've saved you from at least one of these mistakes this year, and I hope all the best to you as you are starting your seeds this year. If you're interested in what seeds I'm starting, I will be filming a video actually later today showing you my seed starting process and talking about exactly which varieties I'm starting. Bonus tip for you, I was literally wrapping up this video and got the notification that my Amazon order had been delivered, and I got these Sharpie Extreme fade resistant pens, and so one of the mistakes that you might make, like I did, is to use a regular old Sharpie on your plant tags as you're putting them outside, or even if you're leaving them under intense grow lights. That tag will fade. And so these are supposed to be stand up against the sun and UV rays. So I'm going to be trying these out. I know there's a few different types of UV resistant pens out there. I'll link to where you can get these on Amazon if you want these specific ones. But that's another thing to consider is, will you be able to read your labels when you're putting things out in your garden? Anyways, I will see you guys again very soon. Happy gardening!